Truth Talks. Please, I'm excited about the Truth Talks. They are addressing true fellowship and what it means, what true fellowship and corporate worship looks like according to the Bible.
I will sing to the old rugged cross and exchange it someday for a crown.
All right. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Go for the thing right here. Put this in my pocket. All right. So last time we were dealing with Israel. We had a few things. So I can only call it how I can understand it. So where were we at in Israel at this time? Let's talk about the land first. What's the land looking like in Israel?
You're fighting with Gaza.
All right, so it's a lot of fight. It's not the biggest, not the biggest. Well, it seemed like today and yesterday is almost the same, right? But we see that the Israelites are currently trying to get a hold of their land. All right, they've established a king. They've been through different wars and turmoils. We've seen the last judge come. We have seen Israel come to a point where now it's the monarchy is in place. And even if the monarchy has failed and a new monarchy is coming, the old monarchy is still in control of the men and women of Israel. And if you think about it, that's exactly what God warned them about. The king you asked for, you will get. He will be in total control of your people. He can take them in and out to war whenever he sees fit. And I believe the last chapter of the book, the chapter 4 and 18, it said, in all the days of Saul, he warred. He was at battle. So Saul saw no rest. He saw no peace because the land was at war. All right. Now, with the land being at war, there was a certain group of enemies. They had already wiped out, or they were supposed to wipe out one group of enemies, but we see they were disobedient, which that's what caused the kingdom to be taken away from Saul. Last shot. He had one last chance. His first act of disobedience, he came and said, here go a new command. But we knew that Saul never had another chance, because when God said he was going to take that kingdom from him, it was coming. Now, last we read Samuel. He had to go and pick a new king. All right, and when he went to pick a new king, he went to Bethlehem. And while he was down in Bethlehem, he went to Jesse's house. And Jesse was from what tribe? That's a good question, because these things are important.
Good question.
Great question. What tribe was Jesse?
We just went to Benjamin. It's Benjamin.
Jesse.
Benjamin.
The dad?
Yeah.
The dad was a Benjamite. So Saul went to a Benjamite. Are we sure Jesse was a Benjamite?
Okay. These tricky questions this morning.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not trick questions.
No.
Because the makeup of who this king was, I wanted it all to be known that when we seen Saul being selected as king, he told Saul, smallest tribe, smallest this, smallest this. Well, David is something completely different. Now, we all had our studies and we went through Judges and we seen what the land went through there. And then after Judges, we seen Ruth. And Ruth was a Moabite. So I just want to point out to you that this same Jesse
came out of
Moabite. Like these are facts. Ruth is in the Bible for a reason. And the reason why I bring it here now, because this is where we are now. This is where we are. We are at the point where we now have David. This is something that God planned way back with Ruth, probably before Ruth, right before that. I mean, we could go all the way back to the beginning if you like, but I like to give people
before the beginning.
Before the beginning. I like to give people checkpoints. So we're going to checkpoint here at Ruth. Ruth was David's great grandma, correct? Am I too many greats, Moon?
I think you went too many greats.
Way too many greats, but she was great. So now we have David. Go ahead if you like, please.
Can we show that, what you just said?
Sure.
Let's go to Matthew chapter 3. I got a question.
Okay.
Where do y'all see that Jesse was a Benjamite?
Let's go to chapter 16 of First Samuel.
16.
Because I'm
There we go.
confused because the chapter 17, verse 12.
Says he's.
Okay, 17:12 says this right here. It says, but David occasionally went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem.
17, 12.
12?
You want to read it, Hope?
Now David was the son of that Ephraite
Yeah.
of
Some more stuff come into play.
Bethlehem, Judah,
Mhm.
whose name was Jesse,
Okay.
and who had 8 sons.
He was
Mhm.
Judean. He was from the tribe of Judah.
Okay.
And okay,
Now they lived in that land. Go ahead.
That's a
verse 16, what? 1?
Mhm.
Now the Lord said to Samuel, how long will you mourn for Saul, seeing I have rejected him from the reign over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go, and I am sending you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided myself a king among his sons.
Now, a Bethlehemite just means he lived in the land of Bethlehem.
Right.
Jesse was of Judah. Long foretold that it was coming. Jesus Christ came from the line of Judah. It's important because it's a lot of lineage that goes into David. And if an Ephraimite, right? His father, Jesse. We remember the history with the Ephraimites. Right? So we got a lot of different makeups of David over time.
Right. And dealing with the makeups, you're saying, remember that they were shown against, so they had to go with outside the family itself, outside of Israel to marry. A lot of mixing going on.
David is special because what do they say about a Moabite? That they won't what? A Moabite won't enter into the kingdom of heaven.
Right. We're not entering the kingdom of heaven.
We're seeing,
except for, go ahead.
Right, we're seeing some of the things where God is saying, I can use whoever I want. You thought I did wonders with Saul, picking from the smallest tribe. I'm going to pick the smallest tribe from a mixed people from the tribe of Judah. He just went all down and gave it a mixed bag. If they would have looked at, then they might have objected, right? Knowing where David wasn't going to go. But we don't see David go there first, right? David does what a good servant should do. He served the king. So let's get into that, because we know Saul is warring. We know Israel is warring. And we know David is somewhere out in the fields right now, petting the sheep and taking care of them. Just having a good old time being a shepherd. Well, is he having a good time? Because we're going to see what David was doing in those fields. We'll see the work he was putting in that made the whole story of what we know about David give us that answer, or let us peer into a little bit when Christ says, I'll go back and get my lost sheep. Makes sense, right? He came from that type of shepherd's blood. Actually came from the blood of the Father, but we're seeing it because I don't want to say this as an absolute, but I believe a lot of people sometimes their vision or what they see, they probably see David more than they see a Christ. The warrior that comes to give the gifts, the one that takes care of the people and all this. They see David because David is a earlier version of Christ, right? We'll point out some of the similarities as we get there. All right, so the Philistines is on one mountain, and we'll go in and I'll pull from some notes. I just don't want to walk around with my iPad. The Philistines is on one mountain, and Israel is on the other side. Let's backtrack because we already talked about how David got there. Keyword is I like how they describe David, that he was, ruddy and handsome. Once again, we have somebody that's the complete opposite of what was described in Isaiah, right? Isaiah 53. Completely different look. David is a handsome man. This is said by the scriptures. He's handsome. Got nice skin, and he's handsome. So David is out there and he's shepherding. And the thing about David is David was always obedient. Now, the Philistines is camped against Israel. They're yelling that, hey, this weak God that y'all serve can't do nothing to us. If you send out one person, our champion will crush him. And we all know who that champion was. What was his name? Goliath.
Goliath.
And where was he from?
From God.
Make a note of that. Because these things that you read and you say, well, why would they say Goliath from Gath? Why is that important? Because one, that was a city and where the Philistines lived. That was one of the 5 cities with the 5 princes, and Goliath was a champion. Now, some things when I went back and I looked into Goliath, right? Because a lot of us, we don't know the old Hebrew measurements. If you do, good. But for those who don't, I'll tell you, Goliath was 9 feet, 9 feet tall and 7 inches. That's 2.5 feet taller than Shaquille O'Neal. That's a pretty big man. Right now, if I was standing next to Shaquille O'Neal, I would look extremely tiny. And I'm not the tallest person. I think anybody in here who was standing next to Shaquille O'Neal would look very short. So you can only imagine that Goliath was no short man. Not only was Goliath not short, and I'm not painting a picture because I tell you about Goliath because we have to see our enemies in all of their strength so we know what we're going against. And David never overestimated his enemy, but God gave us this so we'll know that Goliath was no small man. Goliath carried around an oar. It was 6 feet long, and on the tip of it was a 15.5-pound spear. That's a pretty big spear for a man, and he swung it with no problem. He was slaying men of Israel all day. I believe they fought for almost 40 days and 40 nights, right? So David being obedient, the battle is going on. Now, to me, I would have questions. I would say, where was David at? Like, nobody in Israel knew because David was just out there shepherding his way along, being a good shepherd to where his father came and said what?
His father said what? Asked him to take some food to his brothers at his battle.
He said, hey, David, your brothers are up there, his 3 older brothers. Your 3 older brothers are up there at the front line. What I want you to do is here's some bread, load up the colt or the donkey, and take it up there to your brothers to the front line. Now, David gets a bad rap when he arrives at the front line. But let's backtrack. Let's look at what David was doing. David was being obedient. When we talk about the king or the king that will be, we see that we have an obedient son that tends to the work that his father tells him to do, no matter what it may be. Tend to the sheep. I got it, Dad, with all my heart. Take the bread to the front of the battle. Now, these aren't small tasks. Can you imagine? You are a young shepherd boy. Now, some people will, in their mind, paint a picture of David as being a kid, a little boy, and he could have been at the age of what?
15, 14.
Could have been older than that, because remember, what was the age of battle?
15.
Remember in Deuteronomy, they talked about the age of battle.
Oh, shoot. Anyone over 20?
Anyone over 20. So we know that David is under 20.
Yes.
He's under 20, or he would have been right out there with his older brothers. So David shows up. He could have been anywhere, let's say, to paint the picture of who David is, he could have been anywhere from 15 to 18, or maybe even 19. But he wasn't old enough to be on a battle. In fact, Saul told him that when he came upon Saul. We'll get to that too in a minute. So these things now we know. David, being obedient, gets up there to his brothers and says, hey, what's going on? I brought the bread. I brought the stuff. And what was the first thing his brother accused him of? So David's brothers told him, oh, you only come up here just to sightsee, basically. Just you came up here to see what was going on. And then they tried to attack something that they didn't have all the answers to. Basically saying, where are the sheep? As if David would leave the sheep alone. And David said, I hired hirelings to take care of the sheep. People I trusted to stay and watch our father's sheep. Y'all out here fighting a war. I'm back here doing what I need. Don't question me when I roll up, take the bread so I can go home. Right? But when David got out there, he found out that it was more going on than just the battle. That battle that was going on wasn't just between Goliath, a man of Israel, the Philistines, Israel, Saul king, their king. This was our God is better than your God. And we have a champion out here to prove it. And if we beat y'all, if we win this, y'all just go back to being our servants how it used to be. Because your God is not going to save you this day. We've been out here for 40 days and 40 nights. And nothing has happened. Now, what else happened with 40 days and 40 nights and they were saved? See? I mean, these things are very consistent with salvation. We know salvation will come. They waited. So they out there fighting. So David goes down and David rose up. And I'm going to read from 17:20 to, it's going to be a nice little lengthy read to 37. And I want to read it because the story itself, when David arrives on a battlefield, shows the state of Israel. It shows the state of the king. It shows the state of how the battle was going. Everything in this particular moment until David arrives, Israel is losing. What are they losing, though? Because it really hasn't been too much fighting going on. What are they losing?
They're losing faith. They're losing
Faith.
You know, the will to fight. They didn't feel that God was behind them.
Now they out there with their king. This their king, they pick Samuel, all of this stuff. So God should be with them. And for some reason, Israel knows that he is not. They got their king, though. This should be a clear-cut victory. We got Saul out here. We asked for this. But it didn't work out. So when David, and I'm going to read this, and it's going to kind of tell everything by the word. And David rose up early in the morning and left the sheep with the herdsmen and took and went. I'm reading from the Scripture 2000. I'm change. No, I'll read from here. Just follow along. Promise. I'll try to do it as best I can. And David went as Jesse commanded, followed his father's command. And he came to the camp as the army was going out to fight, and they shouted for battle. And Israel and the Philistines drew up in battle armies against army. And David left his supplies in the hands of the keeper of supplies. So he got there, gave the keeper supplies. I'm here. This is the stuff Dad taught me to bring. Boom, put it down. Keeper of supplies. And he ran to the army. Now remember, David is not the age of a fighting man. No matter how big he may be or whatever age you have him in his head, he is not the age of a fighting man. Which means some of these people, we see the history of the Philistines, of Israel, they have been fighting for a long time. This isn't no 2-day war. This has been going on 40 days. People have been out there fighting, and they've had wars before. So David is not, he doesn't look like he belongs on the battlefield. He doesn't look as if he's going to be the savior. Sound very familiar. Now, when you look at it, maybe David does kind of have that similar look as Jesus did in Isaiah 53. See, because on one hand, we have a young man coming to a place where old men should be and ready to fight. So he doesn't look the part. But Isaiah explains it to us. We have a king that's going to come. It's not going to look the part. You see the symbolism in there? We see how David is already lining up to let us know what's coming. If that's what the Old Testament is fun. You get in there and see it because you'll see Jesus everywhere. Well, I do. Can't help it. Sometimes I go looking for him.
When Jesus showed up, he didn't look like they expected.
Not at all.
And Isaiah talks about that.
Not at all. Just like David didn't look like what anybody expected. In fact, we shall continue. And he ran to the army, and he came to greet his brothers. And he was speaking with them and saw the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, and coming up from the army of the Philistines, and spoke according the same words, and David heard. Remember, Goliath's out there telling him, bring it. I'll kill as many of you as I need to before y'all feel defeated and go back into servitude. And I think, we have the scriptures and we know going forward. I think, man, if David didn't show up that day, what would it be like? But I'm glad he did. Sound like Christ again, right? I'm glad he did. So David heard, and all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, ran from him and were in great fear. And the men of Israel said, have you seen this man who has come up for he has come to reproach Israel. Now, do you hear what the men are saying? Who he came to reproach? Conversation is going to get a little different when David starts to speak. He reproaches Israel, and it shall be that the man who strikes him, the sovereign, is going to enrich him with great riches, or the king, with great riches, and give him his daughter, and give his father house exemption in Israel. And David spoke to the men who stood by, saying, what shall be done for the man who strikes the Philistine and shall take away the reproach of Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should reproach the army of the living God? See what David's putting stuff back into perspective. Israel mindset is now like, wow, what do you mean? What do you mean? Like, wait, oh yeah, he's not fighting us. How did we forget? But still, Israel had a verbal reminder. But you know what they say. How does the word come by? By what?
Hearing.
Yeah, right. So they heard it, but they needed to see it. We have Israel throughout the entire scripture, even all the way up to the New Testament, was a show me type of people. We've seen that with Thomas. You got to show me. I got to poke a finger, stick aside. I need to do something to make sure it's real. And we serve an awesome God that's going to give us an example of what is real. They should reproach the armies of the living God. And the people answer him according to the word, saying, this is what is done for the man who strikes him. Like, hey, David, you heard what Saul said. If you strike him, you got it. And his brothers, and Eliab, his oldest brother, heard when he had spoke to the men. And Eliab's displeasure burned against David. He says, why do you come here? And with whom have you left the few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride and the evil in your heart, for you have come to see this battle. Now let's backtrack. Let's put a little pin in it right there. Did David come to see the battle?
Nope.
David didn't leave. David was okay right where he was, tending to the sheep. Now, David was so cool tending to the sheep because he didn't need to come to that battle. We're going to see why David didn't need to come to the battle. But David had already made his mind up that wherever his father told him to be, that's where he was going to be. And his brothers said, hey, that's not in your heart. You came here to see the fight. David said, no. I didn't come here to see you fight. And David said, now what have I done? Was it not but a word? I just asked a question. And he turned around from him towards another and said the same word. And these people answered him a word like the first word. And when the word which David spoke, they heard, reported to Saul, and he sent for him. And David said to Saul, now, David, this little guy, shows up with some bread, drops it off. He goes into the camp. Everybody's over there in disarray. Now, can you imagine all these big men in armor with their swords and spears and ready to fight? And David just comes up, little cloth, little sandals on. You know, it's hot out there. He walks up. Hey guys, what's going on? Drop the bread off. And they begin to badger him like, you don't belong here. So I could tell you, his brothers were probably a little bit upset and jealous because of, well, we know what happened a few days ago, right? Well, they marched all of us in front of everybody, David. And you came in dead last from the field. And now Samuel anointed you and went away. And now you out here on the battlefield. I guess you really do think you are the anointed.
Man, sound like Joseph.
Sound like a lot, right? Sound like a lot. So David, no, that's not what I'm here for. David has always been about his father's business. And he said, look, let me tell you a story how much so I am. And David said to Saul, because now David has spoke this in front of the crowd. They said, no, got to get you in front of the king. Let's see if you'll still say that. David said, why not? I know what I've done. And David said to Saul, you are not able. And Saul said to David, let me backtrack. David, where
32.
Okay, 32. And David said to Saul, let no man heart. And David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant is going, and I shall fight with the Philistine. So David rolled up, and automatically he was like, I guess I'm up next. Even if it was a line of warriors waiting to step up and fight Goliath, David showed up and said, I don't care who got next, I got now. Not because of who they are, because of what they're saying to us. As his chosen people, I'm not going to stand here and allow this. And if y'all not going to go, I don't care if I'm not a man of battle. I don't care if I haven't made the cut. I'm going. In a short term. But let's see how it worked out in the word. Because I like it. God says it so much better than I could ever say it. And Saul said to David, You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with. You are but a youth, and he a man of battle from his youth. Now, let's think about the Philistines. Let's think about that phrase. Shepherd in the field taking care of sheep. Most of them lived a pretty simple life. They fought off the wild, they fought off the things that came against him. We'll see that. But a Philistine man growing up, probably from the first day of his life, was hard. Was hard. He lived in a town that was lawless. Their mothers and fathers were probably lawless. It was a lawless people. They fought. They fought for everything they had. They were warring people. I watch a lot of shows with my wife, and one of the ones I watched is Vikings. And I was like, man, the Vikings they just wild. This is crazy. They would literally get off the boat. And no matter who was in the town, they would kill them. They would just run up and kill everybody. Their whole thing was, and they would celebrate the fact of how many people they killed. And I said, wow, man, this is crazy. The Vikings. And then instantly in my mind, I said, wow, that sounds like the Philistines. We raid, we burn, we take what we want. They didn't mind. Goliath was living proof. Send as many people as you out here and I'll kill them all. He was happy to do so. It was his pleasure. So when Saul said, you're a man of your youth, and this man has been, so Goliath must have had a reputation amongst the Philistines for him for people to say, I'm not going to go out there and go against him. His size, 1, carrying that big old spear, 2, he looked pretty tough, 3. Yeah, we ain't going out there. But David coming up with no fear. Israel was already gripped in fear, had none. He came up and said, I'm ready to go. Then David said to Saul, your servant has been tending sheep for his father. And when a lion or bear came, I took the lamb out of the flock. Now, this is the thing. I've heard the joke growing up, and you talk to people and they say, man, if you ever see me fighting, help the bear. This is a help the bear situation because that bear needed some help. Hey, David was a help the bear, throw honey on me type person. Because he said, he came and took the lamb out of it. And you notice specifically what he said. He didn't say sheep.
No, a lamb.
He picked a specific type of sheep. Because when you look at a herd of sheep, they stay together. But if you actually look, they put the lamb in the middle. But when the fear comes, the sheep scatter. And who's left there?
Defenseless? The lamb.
The lamb. A little lamb. So this bear and this lion will come. Now, if you notice, he said bear and lion. Separate occasions. So he's been tested twice by a bear and a lion. Now, I like science and I like nature and I like the Animal Channel. Do you know that a bear with one swipe can cut your intestines open? Just one. Doesn't take much. One hand. A lion bites with about 1,000 pounds of pressure. So one bite, you're over. That's actually how they hunt. They jump on the back of the animals and they snap their neck to where they become paralyzed and eventually they give up. So David fought 2 of the most ferocious animals that we in this current day and age knows. And let's see how he handled them. And he said, as I was there, and they would come and take the lamb, and he said, and I went out. So this means that the lamb was already gone. The lamb was gone. The bear and the lion had already took the lamb, but God stayed the lamb alive, even though they were taken by a bear or a lion. Man, most animals ferociously rip apart their prey right on the spot. I mean, you're the king of the jungle. I ain't got to go nowhere. I can just eat it right here. But these bears and these lions would take wherever they would go away from the flock, and they would take the lamb. So this means that David had to leave the flock. Now, let's say it was 99. I'm just hypothetically putting a number out there. Let's say it was 99 sheep and David had to go save this one lamb. Sounds very familiar to me. Very familiar. And he went out after it. And he went out after it. He went out after the bear and the lion and to mouth. These animals, primal in nature, with food in their mouth. They are ready. And David said, I went out there to rescue that lamb. And when they rose against me, I took hold of its beard and struck it and killed it. That's close quarter combat for somebody who ain't never been in battle. He knows how to do it pretty well. Grab a lion by the beard, grab a bear by the beard. And he said, your servant has to bear. This uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, seeing he has reproached the army of the living God. You notice Israel said he approached Israel. David is not saying he approached Israel. He approached the army of God. That's all. Once you say you approach God, it's over. I don't care who you are. Let's fight. What you got?
I've been trying to wait.
No, don't wait.
You said that another time, and as I looked at this story before, this is the same David. We tend to forget God's word sometimes, but God never forgets his word, right? And I also know that the thing we meditate on the most is the thing that comes out in a time of challenge. We use the example, I always talk about you all in the military, that you don't have time, when the bullets start flying, you don't have time to think. What comes out is your training. They say when battle comes, your training will come out. Well, it's the same thing when it comes to the word of God. David, this is the same David that said, I hid thy word in my heart so I wouldn't sin against you, right? David was a man who was familiar with the word of God. And in the moment right here, when battle is time to be battle tested, I put down here, Petedy, that there was a passion that I think David might have had on his mind, because in God's word, some things he speaks specifically to. Then we don't have to guess. There are other things we have to use scripture to interpret scripture. But the thing that I think, one of the things I think came to David's mind is he, way back in Abram, when he was talking about his people, he said, I'll bless those who curse you. And I'll curse those who, I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you, I will curse. Now, if you look at this story, Goliath was doing a lot of cursing. And he was cursing, like you're saying, he was cursing. You see, David knew who the issue was. He said, who's this guy that's coming up against the people of God? David might have known and meditated on the fact that hearing him curse God's people, he knew there was no way, Petedy, that it don't matter if it's a bear, it don't matter if it's a lion, it don't matter if whatever the obstacle is. If we know what God says in his word about it, and we're meditating on his word, when the time we need his word the most, it should come out. And you brought it up here once again. Everybody else was looking at Goliath and the challenge and how big it was and how surpassable it was, and they was like, hold up,
this is nothing.
God said, those who curse us, he's gonna curse. So he can't win, Petedy. And I just wanted to bring that point out.
Oh, David knew he had it. You are rightfully so. Just like when we look at the mission that Christ was on, he never changed focus because he already knew victory. He already knew victory. Once again, we see as some people will say, a lesser Christ. That's what some call it. That's a David, yes.
And if speaking of David and Goliath, and I'll go to 1 Corinthians 1:27, when it said God has chosen the weak things that men see as weak of the world to put to shame the mighty things.
And that is the proof. So, and I want this to be the mindset, right? The proof coming afterwards. Like everything that we know, we have it collectively as a story. But David didn't have that. Like David only had, like, so in Israel, right? The word was told you as you went and you learned from the priests. You only learn. So right now, technically, they only have how many books of the Bible? 5. Right now they have 5. They got 5. So everything that David had, everything that he has learned has been from history, has been from scriptural teaching in the temple, and what his father and his brothers, they commune at home.
Yeah, the word of mouth.
Word of mouth.
About word of mouth.
So yes, the things we know, we have the benefit, as the pastors say here, the veil isn't on us. We're fortunate, but David still was veiled, and yet he knew something that an army fighting for that same thing that David knew. He knew victory where they only knew fear. He might have us, so he a little afraid. And I'm talking about the army of Israel, right? Now,
God talked to David.
Did he?
God communed with it. God, David had Christ in him.
I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying. But this is before the Holy Spirit. Once again, we're speaking on something that we can call, we can name. That's the beauty of where we are right now in our current state. We don't have a reason or excuse not to know the things that make us brave. I step up because I know God covers me. So yeah, he right.
So David had some, you know, and he had faith. He had faith.
He had
a
faith.
few things that not everybody had.
David had the, now I will go back and say something as simple as this. David had the one thing that the rest of the army of Israel didn't. The one thing that Jesus Christ said that we all must believe. David believed in his victory. He believed in his victory. He trusted God. He said it. Not one time has David said, I'm the man, I can go out here and slay everybody because I know this, I know. No, David said, you go against God, I'm on God's side, there's no way you can beat me. It's simple. I believe that. That's how he depicts it. So let me close out this for just 37, and then we'll go through some more. And David, now remember, David is speaking to a king. And David said, God who has delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear, he delivers me from the hand of the Philistine. And Saul told David to do one thing. Go and God be with you. Why couldn't he give the same army that same confidence? Can you imagine empowering an entire army? Because you know why he couldn't do it? Because Saul didn't have that confidence either. We already knew that Saul was probably under a lot of mental stress.
Mental stress.
Mental stress.
No, the kingdom has been stripped from him, but he had to let it go. But understand, but you also have to look at it in the sense, this right here is that when Eric spoke on it also, is that the army focus wasn't on God at all. Their focus was on themselves as being feared. Their focus was on the king that they had chosen. They got it put in place. That's where they're looking at. Okay, and they're also trying to figure out where's Samuel.
Yeah, no, Samuel wasn't coming around.
No, he wasn't gonna come
He
back
did his
anymore.
job. Samuel was somewhere.
You fighting this on your own
because he has did what God had told him to do. David's up now.
They gave up the God for a king. They gave up the king for a king. So that's what's in their mind. They lost everything when they did that.
Yeah, protection.
So you know that's why. And David, it's different. It's a difference there. You know, he came with the blessings of God.
But now, David. Now it doesn't say how much time between the anointing. So I normally don't try to bring in a time that this happened or that happened. I'm just going off the fact that
it was anointed.
Yeah, he was anointed. David, as of right now, the David that we know is just doing what he's told by his father. That's how he even ended up there. And then when he get there, by being told, in the military, there has this thing they say, follow your last order, right? Because that's the one you got to go back and tell everybody you did. You know, you can't say, well, unless it's unlawful, right? So when he got up there, they brought him before the king. Now, what did God say about the king? Y'all picked this king. You're going to do what he said. And David is now telling the king, I can go accomplish the thing that you've ordered because I am obedient to God. They just didn't know that David was saying that. I'm obedient to God. Everywhere he went, I'm obedient to God. My father told me to do something. Honor thy mother and thy father. Their days will be longer. His days is getting very lengthy because he did the one thing and he listened to his father. Sound very familiar. Love how these stories come together.
He take it to the front line then?
Say again?
What kind of food was he taking to the front line?
What's bread?
Showbread.
And it's funny, he was bringing bread. If I tell you.
Right there. Look.
David was being obedient to his father.
His father's father.
Left from where he was to take bread to the people. So, the bread of life,
You always try to talk.
Look, 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 look.
that's the bread of life.
Let me read this to you. You're looking at 17. You look at verse 17 is what you want to know, right? But you're tying it in with showbread, you're tying it with the temple and everything. Go ahead, Joe.
No, I'm just thinking about the lesser David and the greater David.
Yes.
Yeah. We're talking about just taking bread to men in war.
Oh, well, he took dry grain, 10 loaves of bread, cheese.
He left his father
To go serve his father.
To do the father's will.
Yes.
to take the bread to the people.
So, and it's funny how we every part of this story, it's tripped in symbolism. Why do you think they in Israel, they waited for this? They waited because if David was this good, somebody coming down from his line all these generations, way down the line, if David was that good, this guy coming gotta be a warrior because David slayed Goliath with a stone. Oh, let's get into that. So David,
You done gave the plot away.
No,
You
no,
done gave it all away.
I didn't. Because David, after that conversation with Saul, Saul says, well, you know what, David, you're getting ready to go out and fight. Let me give you my best armor, my best helmet, my best this, my best that. And David, I play a game called Fallout, right? And I like to play a lot of video games and watch TV. So in Fallout, the more equipment you put on, right, you get a little stronger, you look good, but you move real slow. So you're a guy like this. It take you an hour just to get across the board. So a lot of times people just shred their gear off, they move faster, they carry the most simplest weapon. And look at what David did. He said, this stuff way too much. I can't fight in this. So David, now this is the thing, they're in the valley. There's stones all around. But David goes to a particular place and picks him out 5 smooth stones. Now, if y'all got time later on tonight, I want you to go on YouTube. Because I look up stuff. It's not that I was always told to trust but verify, and it's not the Bible that I don't trust. I wanted to see how a man would sling a stone. Have you ever seen how they slung stones back in the day? It ain't like this little slingshot that everybody, it's a big, long leather cord that the shepherds kept in their pocket, almost the length of a whip. And at the end of that length of the whip, they could put whatever they want. Normally it's a stone probably about yay big. And they put it in there, and when they spin it, it doesn't sound like, oh, I'm just spinning something. It sounds like a helicopter. And when he let that stone go, that stone fly, and it crashed, boom, and it almost explodes. Like it literally almost explodes. When I watched that video of that man do it, I said, no, this is not real. This is
No, it's real.
Then you know what he did? He lined up a shield and showed how I go through a shield. I said, man, that went through a shield. Then he lined up a stone on top of a mountain. I said, man, it could be accurate. He lined up, boom, he was accurate. And then he put something way up there. I said, no, this is fixed. And he did it again. I was like, wow, that was about 40, 50 feet. You telling me Goliath was standing in front of this man? Yeah. Close enough? Yeah. So Goliath pretty much, he must have never seen a shepherd in his day. As most non-believers probably never seen a shepherd in their day. He never fought somebody. Everybody that he fought came at him with sword and shield. And David actually said something to that line. He said, you come with me, you come to me with sword and with spear and a javelin. David said, he said, but I come to you, God, the Lord of hosts. Well, the Lord of hosts, in the name of the Lord of hosts, whom you have reproached. So everything that you brought to fight, I guarantee you it's not enough. I think, I will never change the story of the Bible, but I like to think sometimes, just because my brain like to think. I think if David would have slapped Goliath, Goliath would have died. I think if David would have walked over to Goliath and said, Goliath would have died. I just think we just got the cool story of a stone because that makes everybody say, ooh, he killed him with a rock. But it didn't matter what David's choice of weapon was. He could have went over to Goliath and tugged on his beard. We already seen it. That worked twice.
Choice of man to take to allow down.
David understood it was never him. He was just a tool for Israel's salvation. No matter if it was a rock, no matter if it was a sword, whatever it was, he didn't need it because he said, I got God. He knew his job. He knew he would fulfill it. Simple enough. So after this, and this day, God shall deliver you into my hands, and I shall strike you and take your head from you. And the carcass I should give to the Philistines today, and the birds of heaven and the wild beasts of earth, so that all the earth knows that God is for Israel. So David wasn't just going out there and getting a victory. Not just for where we was at. So if I had to go to this timeline, right? Because I like that being there. It kind of point out what was going on in the rest of the world. If y'all get a good look at what was going on in the rest of the world, there was a lot of things going. So when David was making this decree, this was going out worldwide. That Israel is turning into something. Well, they already were. We know that but everybody else was like, wait a minute. This Israel place, or these Israel people, remember, because they were a nation. The Israelites, they can fight. They are building up a kingdom. And guess what now? We know what they didn't know. They're now getting ready to see how a king leads, how a king acts. Because a lot of the things from this point after this victory, we're going to start to see how a king conducts himself. All right. And this day he should deliver you, right? And all the assembly know that God does not save with sword or spear, for the battle belongs to God. He shall give you into our hands. And it came to be that the Philistines, they arose and they came and drew near to David. Now they don't ran up on him. And David ran towards the army of the Philistines. Little guy, just out there. Here we go. And he had his sling and he was spinning it. And he took one of them stones out and he struck him in the forehead. Now, David was a man of his word. After he struck Goliath down dead, he ran over, stood over him. He took the sword and drew it out of his sheath and he killed him and cut off his head. And when the Philistines saw the champion was dead, they fled. So you telling me for 40 days and 40 nights, they stood out there and that's all it took? That's all we had to do? Put the faith back in God that we could have victory and we could have been home 40 days and 40 nights ago? Like at least Noah couldn't get off the boat and swim. You telling me that's all they had to do? But just like we know with regeneration, you can't be regenerated until Christ does it for you. The army could not save themselves because they had forgot who they were fighting for. I like that story because it is a lot of our salvation dripped into it. And I'm not going to get into it too deep, but you can see it. And if you continue to comb over David's life, you'll see how those stories reflect onto who we are, to who God is for us, to how he saves us. It's just so enriching to go back and dig into the Old Testament sometimes. And after this fight, this is kind of things where things start to go a little sour for David. Now, you can't win a fight in front of a king and his people because things might happen. All right, so and here's how I want you to understand how the kingdoms is also becoming divided. Because after David won, he represented the faithful. If you think about it, he represented the faithful. And it's very peculiar how it was chosen here for these words. And the men of Israel and Judah. Where did the divide come from? They were all out there waiting, right, for the fight. Why didn't you just say in the men of Israel? Because as we know, as the story goes on, what happened to the two kingdoms?
They split.
And how do they get split? By what two? And what kingdoms? What side is on what? Who's on the north side? See, we'll get to that. See, I like that future homework. That's all in here. Kingdom split, but eventually. But I like how I said, I'll have to go back and look for names, but there's a split. Right. And the men of Israel and Judah arose and shouted, and they pursued the Philistine far as the entrance of the valley, because remember, they were standing on two sides of the mountain, and there was a valley. And the wounded of the Philistine fell along the way. So they kept killing as they was going all the way to Gath and Ekron. So they followed them. They are following, they wiping them out. Now they got heart to pursue and they ain't have heart to fight. Very, very, very interesting people, but who am I to judge? I always look at them and say, I probably would have been amongst the men who was standing there waiting for somebody to come up and fight. That's just me being honest, because I understand that I know I'm not perfect. But now that I've got to see the whole story, I think I could stand there and have that same bravery as David. Because we see it now as a whole. We should all have that bravery in us to stand there.
I haven't seen it, but he had to deal with it with Phil face.
And then the children of Israel turned back from chasing the Philistines and they plundered. Once again, they back taking stuff. And David took the head of the Philistine. He did exactly what he said. He's going to bring it. And you take this carcass and leave it here. So all the earth know that we won, that God is victorious in us. And David returned from striking the Philistines. Abner took him and brought him before Saul, the head of the Philistines, brought the head of the Philistines in his hand. And Saul said to him, whose son are you? And David said, the son of your servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite. You don't remember me? Like, didn't we meet a couple days ago? Right? No. And when it came to be the end speaking, and when it came to be, we had ended speaking to Saul, that the beginning of Jonathan was knit to David's being, and Jonathan loved him. Now, Jonathan just watched David do this. Now, Jonathan and David are close in age. I think Jonathan might have been a little older than David, but they're close in age. And when Jonathan seen David, he said, wow, that's my best friend. I'm going to look out for him. He is like my own being. And he looked out for David. We're going to see that too. And Saul took him that day and would not let him return to his home. Because remember, what was David's job for Saul?
Harp.
Harp, a lyre, right? Saul
No.
would,
Yeah.
huh?
Yeah, play the harp.
When Saul would have a moment where the evil spirit would come on him, blue, blue, blue. But for some reason, Saul couldn't recognize David. And I think it's because David had did something so amazing to everybody who was out there, he didn't look the same. That's just my opinion. Because I've seen some people do some amazing feat. You know, you ever have somebody come up, and I'm not putting David's feet in there. I'm more aligning how when you see somebody go from something to something else, it's almost like, I don't even know who you are anymore. Almost like a figure of speech. You ever have somebody and be like, man, I didn't know you could sing, and they just went, what? And they bust out a beautiful voice. You be like, oh, you're an angel from the heavens. I couldn't believe you could sing like that. It's not that the person changed, it's just they're different. So when David went out there, he was just the bread delivering shepherd. When he left out there, he was the man in Israel. Just one day. One day, being obedient changed David's whole life. Just go take the bread out there. I like when I hear David, when I talk about David, his obedience. All right. So Jonathan actually does something to prove to David his loyalty. I love you, David. What you just did, I think you are better than me. He took everything. Now, for the king's son, who is next in line, because remember, the reason why the judges were getting relieved is because by the natural order of things, if I am the king, then guess who's up next? His son. But what did his son do? He saw the greater authority in who David was, and he stripped and gave him everything that he had. Now, we're going to learn a little bit later on, Saul sensed this. He felt it. He even said it. It's like he could take your birthright from you and you not even doing nothing. Jonathan said, this man is good. Ain't got no beef with him. We'll get into that. All right, so Jonathan took the robe, and David went out wherever Saul sent him. Once again, we're seeing a true king. Remember, we got an order of people that God has put in place. And this time, there is a king. And the king tell you go left, go right, you go left, and you go right. And what you'll see through this whole thing is how a king should act. Obedient, rule following, honoring those above him. So Saul sent them out. And it says, when he went out, he acted wisely. And Saul sent him over men of battle. Now, once again, I'm not one to say how much time passed, but David went from being this person that was on the battlefield, a man of his youth. Remember, you're a man of your youth, and he's a man of youth from his battle. And now he's leading men. Because God is leading David, even though David is under the king. It's a weird dynamic, right? So God doing this because God said, I put Saul in place, just like I put David in place to come up behind him. They still got to do what I want them to do. I am leading from wherever the game is being played. Don't worry about it. I got it. And David is proof of that. David was really, I like David because David was just hey, God tell me to go there. Saul tell me to go there. I'm going to go. Because he knew victory was wherever he went. And the people actually started to see that. And the women, they seen that. And after David won and it came to be, David returned from striking the Philistines. The women came out all of the city of Israel singing and dancing to meet Saul and Saul the king, and with tamarines and joy, and everybody's out there, and they come out there and they're not just celebrating Saul. They decided they wanted to make a nice song, and it went a little bit like this. I think I just hear, the cymbals, everybody just playing music in the street, and they're like, Saul killed 10,000. Everybody like, yeah. City going, okay, David killed. And then they do it again. And it's all like, what? And then David, they said that twice. This is what the people are saying. Now, I say that to say it's because you see the people shifting to David. If me and you can read it, imagine how it felt to Saul. I've had a conversation with Samuel, and he told me, I went out to battle, I couldn't get victory. This young man who come up, very attractive, musically inclined, the townspeople love him, and everybody is singing his praise and not mine. Saul's still the king. That's a tough pill to swallow. It sounds like I'm a king and I can kill him. Because that's exactly what Saul thought. They like him too much. I'm going to kill him. As soon as he walk in here, I'm going to throw this spear directly at his head. And the women sang and danced. And it came to the next day, and the evil spirit came upon Saul, and he prophesied in the house while David was playing a lyre in his hand. And as usual, and the spear was in the hand of Saul. Saul said, I'm going to chuck this spear at David. And I'm going to end him right now because we're not going to have that remix going in because they might start adding more kills into the mix. And they might just take me out the song, David killed 10,000. Where the Saul part at? Well, you ain't God, Saul. Like David was the man. And he wasn't even trying to be. That 10,000 he killed, guess who sent him out on the battlefield? Who sent him out there to fight? Who was he going with? Saul. Saul said, let's go, David. David said, all right. David never said, I'm going out here to kill 10,000. He said, I'm following my king. And if my king is in a battle with 10,000 people, why not take 10,000 of them out? I can't help it if they came up with the snazzy song as I walked into town on the spot. I'm being blamed for it. And then Saul hurled a spear. Let me strike David, even to the wall. But twice David withdrew from breath. He was out of there. Now, this conflict goes on for a while. Saul tries, and I'm summarizing. Saul tries to kill David. David runs. Saul tries to kill David again. David runs. David's like, hey, it's not me. I'm a good guy. People start to say, David is a good guy. Why are you trying to kill Saul? And then Saul say, you turn on me too. We'll kill all of you. So we'll see how that goes. And Saul was afraid of David, a fear. But it wasn't just David, because God was with David. Now, who sent God with David? Don't worry, I'll wait. Let's go back to 17. And I'll tell you who sent God with David. Y'all ready? And David said, God who delivers me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear, he delivered me from the hand of the Philistine. And Saul said to David, go and God be with you. It's funny how Saul, this evil spirit, must make him confused because he's the one who told him go with God. So now you're afraid of him because God you sent him with? This is very strange. This story it's always interesting when people. All right. So Saul therefore removed him from his presence and made him commander over thousands. And he went and he came before the people. And David was acting wisely, because remember, David did what he was supposed to do. He was obedience. Obedience is acting wisely. He did what he was told. Whatever Saul said, go do, he went. But Israel and Judah loved David. Israel and Judah loved David. Israel and Judah loved David as he went out and came before them. Now, this is very peculiar, because if you look at when Jesus came, it was divided. And some of the things that the Pharisees actually said was, hey, I think it's in John 12:10. He said, look, the world goes after him. So you can think that the Saul was saying that the world, the Israelites, were going after him. And just like the Pharisees plotted to kill Jesus, it's funny, Saul was plotting to kill David. You see a lot of similarities here? This lineage, when we get to Christ, this was all planned before. Like I can just imagine. I'll take in my mind sometimes when I read, and I take the rest of the book out. Like I take it out just so I can have a surprise when I'm like, oh, it's more book. Yeah, I'm saved. But like I take the rest of the book out and I put myself in there and I say, these people in this time, they were seeing God's work right there. Right there in front of their eyes. We seeing the king move. We seeing the king do this. They maintain that faith of a king through generation after generation, 42 generations, I believe, that this king was going to come. Somebody strong as David. Wise as Solomon. They wanted this king. He's going to come here and lightning bolts and thunder and everything else. And it was the complete opposite. Because they got a king on display. They got to see what a good king looked like. They got to see what a good one looked like. They got to see what a good one did. They got to see it. And did they appreciate it? Yeah, they cheered for him. We're going to see how much David was appreciated when he was on the run. He only had a few people to help. All right. It's funny, right? Now, when you go on a run, if they know that God is with you, even the people on the inside who should be on the outside persecuting you, they can't do it. It just ain't in them. They can try, it just won't work. It's just something about you. And when I say you, I mean every individual in here. It's something about you. Then when people come up against you, I ain't talking about a bill surprise you. I'm talking about that true test. You just win. I got a bunch of victorious people in here. You just win. Because that same spirit that was in David, we got it through a later David. The same way the people of Israel feel, we get that same joy of that salvation. We know we're saved. I mean, they were still fighting, but as you can see. All right. Now, David is now in a predicament. David need a wife because there was a promise made on the battlefield. And that promise is meant to be kept. And Saul said, hey, I'll give you my oldest daughter. And when he went to give him the oldest daughter, he said, no, I'm going to set him up. This is going to be a trick. I'm going to do a bang inside. I'm going to take the oldest daughter, give her to somebody else. And when I give her to somebody else, I'll give him my other daughter. And then what'll happen is he'll be so mad that he'll fly off the rails. David didn't. David said, it's fine. I understand you gave her away. I'll take your other daughter. She's just as beautiful. And guess what? She likes me too. Trickery. I got you because that's the woman that likes me anyway. But Saul is the ultimate. I'm going to lure you in, but I'm going to give you an ultimatum. You need to go out here for my daughter and bring me back the foreskins of the Philistine. Now, when David hear this, it's crazy because David just jumped up and did it. He didn't waste no time. He had a wedding to get to. He had a woman that loved him. You see what I'm saying here? It wasn't just that he loved her, she loved him. That love was shown. So David jumps up, go back, bringing foreskins. Saul mad, but hey, I got to be a man of my word, and I give you my daughter. Am I missing anything that anybody want to pull out? And I'm not skimming over this because everything I'm saying has annotations in David's life. Everything that's happening to David is for a reason. Even getting the second daughter as opposed to the first. All right. Now, before he took that wife, David had some questions for Saul. He had questions for Saul. He had a question for the messenger that Saul sent. His question was, who am I that you want to give your daughter to? Who am I? I'm from this tribe, from this person, the youngest of this. Kind of the same thing that Saul did when Samuel was saying, hey, I'll pick you as king. Because we do know that by David marrying his daughter, that puts him where? Say again? Which makes him potential heir for the throne. Now, we understand that he married the other daughter off, right? But David is young. We know he's younger than Jonathan. We don't know how old the other man was that married the other daughter. But we know David is younger than Jonathan. So Jonathan, by right, is up next to be the king. But David is now part of the royal family. There are rules that he's supposed to conduct by himself. And we'll see that he breaks one of those rules when he goes on the run. They try to kill him. And Saul said, now, and David asked the servant, and I'll kind of give you one of the questions asked, but it was asked multiple times. So I'll give you one from here. And the servant of Saul, this is when Saul spoke to the word in the hearing of David. And David says, does it seem to you a small matter to be the king's son-in-law? Seeing I'm a poor man and lightly esteemed, or I have very little glory. Like, this is a question David is internally fighting with. Does it seem like I'm worthy to be the king's son-in-law? What Saul had for evil for David was for the good of the whole entire world. He needed to be there. Because remember, David's not a king. We talk about the line of David, right? When we get to, not a king.
Has he not been anointed?
He has, but the people don't know it. Remember, we have the whole book, but right now, David is not a king. That's why these questions, Saul is still a king.
Saul's still a king. Because Samuel was afraid to go do what God said until God told him to do it this way. But
So let me. So when Samuel anointed David, he anointed him because he was going to be the king. Right? But the anointing is the chosen. He is my chosen. I anoint his head with oil, for he is the chosen one to do what I want to do. Which in this path is the kingdom. But he never said, he said, I'm going to take Saul out. He didn't say when, he didn't say how. He put David in a position to where, imagine having a bad boss. And everybody know you can't get rid of the boss. You're not going to kill the boss because the boss works for God. When we get to the end, show you why David maintained that, because David understood something that most people, when they read the book of Samuel, they give Saul a bad rap. They just, man, Saul, man. No, Saul was anointed. Because David, at the end, he does something.
Inauguration. It's inauguration.
right.
So David is not a king. So he's asking questions. That's like somebody going out, and we see a David being a man. We say, oh, David, he's getting a woman. Well, let me explain. Let's do a little flip and understanding. So in those times, it was very uncommon for a king, or even a king's son, or even a king's second son, to walk down amongst the commoners on a nice, cool day and say, you're beautiful. You're a beautiful young lady. Come, let me take you back to the castle. The king would have looked at him and said, why do you bring this common woman here? It's nothing that can come from her. So when David is asking this question, he's basically saying, by you letting me marry your daughter, I'm going to go from a nobody to the son-in-law of a king. Are y'all sure that they want to bestow that on me? Like, what have I done? Now, remember, David is humble. He'll kill 10,000 people. He's bringing foreskins. He's doing everything he needs to do. But he's asking this question of himself. Am I worthy? And I take it a lot of people probably ask that question too. Am I worthy for this? And just like we should know, because we have the backstory, yeah, David, you was worthy. Didn't Samuel anoint you a couple days ago? So even David still has a little bit veiled to him. Because if David knew he was going to be king, he might act different. He might have said, oh, Saul, you still the king, I'm king. Do we have further division? Do we got two kings? Is Israel in a better state or a worse state? So David did what he was to do. Be obedient to the king. Because remember, this is not David's obedience to the king is not just obedience to the king. It is obedience to the law. So can we say that David is one that keeps the law? Man, it's crazy. It's David. Now we know that David has his shortcomings later on, but right now we don't have the whole book. We have right where we are. We know what we know about David. You know, he keeps the law. He's obedience. A reasonable person could pull that out, right? He's obedient. He keeps the law. He works under the king. So, and the servant of Saul said to him, David has spoken these words. He went back to Saul. And Saul said to David, the king has no delight in any payment for the bride, but 100 foreskins. So this is the mission. 100 foreskins of the Philistines to take vengeance on the king's enemies. But Saul intended to have David fall by the hands of the Philistines because Saul knew something that David knew. He might not have knew he was anointed. He knew, but he knew God was with him. And he knew better than to lay a hand on David. I mean, if you think about it, even throwing spears, he was out of his mind and that evil spirit came on. But he said, I'm not going to be the one to put David down because the people at this point, if I would have killed him earlier when I threw that spear the first time, I could have got away with it. He was just a armor bearer that was coming here, made me mad. I'm a king. I could have got away with that. But now the people like David. So Saul has he would have liked that. He would have loved to keep David right there in the side pocket. But David had God working for him, not just so much David's movements, but the people around. They were placed in place by God. The wife, his brother-in-law, they were all put there in place. And this might be a good point to wrap up. And Saul knew, and David said to Saul, what was that? He intended for David to fall by the hands of the Philistines. And the servant declared these words to David. And it pleased David well to become the king's son-in-law. And the day had not expired. Remember what I said? It was still new in the day. And David arose and went to his men, and he struck 200. He didn't want to give him 100. He wanted to make sure I had double the amount. He struck 200. And David brought their foreskins and set them before the sovereign set them before the king to become the king's son-in-law. And Saul gave him Michal, his daughter, as a wife. And Saul knew that, right now I'm reading 1 Samuel chapter 18:28. And Saul knew that God was with David, and Michal, the daughter of Saul, did love him. So Saul was still more afraid of David. And Saul became an enemy of David all the days. So Saul was David's enemy until Saul died. That's how deep this goes. That Saul wants David dead. And the prince of the Philistines went out to fight. And it came to be, whenever they went out, that David acted more wisely than the servants of Saul. So amongst the people that work for Saul, David is the one that's doing exactly what he's supposed to be doing. All right. So his name became very important. Some manuscripts say precious. In other words,
highly esteemed.
David went from being the shepherd to being an obedient servant of the king. I think it's a good place to pause. We'll pick back up. Unless y'all want to go, I'm enjoying myself up here. All right, but we'll
You had the question.
The evil spirit that was upon Saul, where did it come from?
God. Oh, I wasn't supposed to answer that. I feel like I can answer the question. I like occasionally get to answer the question. Sorry. I forgot I'm not supposed to answer questions. Sometimes I like to answer questions too. Don't do me like that.
God will make you feel a certain way. In this case, he made Saul feel a certain way, something that vexed him and made him really envy the way he was. And it wasn't that he was thinking that this was external torment, that he kept about Saul.
Are there any questions? So 17 and 18 are very, once again, I like a lot of different things. So I like origin stories. All right. So, in the Bible, we have origin stories. We have birth of Christ. We have Abraham, Moses. We have the origin stories, right? How they came about, these men of God. But it's like when you read about King David, it's almost like you get to have two origin stories. But it's like you ever see a prequel? It's like you get to see a prequel. Now, before, when I would read and study my scriptures, I didn't see that prequel. I only saw one story or the other because I always thought that Christ was in the New Testament and all the stuff that all the law and the wars and the battles were in the Old Testament. But when you put them together, somehow they start to line up. You really see that this entire Bible, from the very beginning, and as we know, before the beginning, is about Christ. We see that when you get to the end, he tell you amen, because you have read the entire story of Christ from beginning to end. And in this part, we as believers, we should understand now a little bit when you go and read the New Testament, why when Jesus came, they was more looking for David. So you can see how the people in the New Testament couldn't understand the Christ they had before them, because we want David. We want a pretty boy fighter that everybody's, hey, go get us some Roman foreskins. Cut them up. Chop them up, bring them down here. Tear it. Do it, Dave. Do it, David. Hey, wait. And Jesus said, I just came from heaven with miracles and a few other things, and I gotta go back home. So I need y'all to follow me while you can, because I'm out of here. The rest will be left on y'all. So as we going to continue to take a voyage into David, we will see the path where David also shows us the man side, the human side. Because God wants to remind us that we didn't want a David. We wanted a Jesus. Questions?